And vegetable growing can sometimes be a challenge, and one of the most disheartening things is when you work hard to germinate your seeds, you tender those little plants and you plant them out, to come back in a few days or a week's time to find out they've been eaten by insects or wildlife. So there are occasions when we need to protect our vegetables as they're growing to ensure that they do go to harvest. So in this video, I'm going to give you some tips on what types of protection you might need to provide to your vegetables, different types of netting and other types of protection, and when the right time to use them is. So if you do like this video, don't forget to give it the thumbs up, and if you want to subscribe to the channel for future videos on how to sow and grow fruit and veg and 1 or 2 recipe ideas, then don't forget to press the subscribe button. Now there are loads of different products available on the market, butterfly netting, insect netting and mesh, bird netting, and many other products. But it's really important to know what is the right type of netting for your various different types of fruit and vegetables, and that's something I'm going to attempt to do over the next few minutes in the remainder of the video. Now there's lots of insects that like different types of vegetables, things like cabbage white butterfly, flea beetle, white fly, black fly, aphids and carrot fly, and you could go on, there are quite a number. All of them will attack different types of vegetables, and some of them are more prolific than others. So therefore, when your vegetables get to a certain stage, it's really important to consider netting. And netting is one of the greatest investments that you'll make on your allotment or your vegetable patch, because it's something that you can use year on year. The netting behind me, which I'm going to discuss in a few moments, I bought about 5 years ago, and I've just used it every year from then onwards, and it's in reasonably good condition still. So over its lifetime, it becomes a really good investment. Now I'd like to start off by talking about insect netting or insect mesh, and this is the protection that you'll need in order to prevent the smaller type of insects getting to your vegetables. Now don't underestimate the amount of insects that can attack your vegetables. If you have an attack of black fly or white fly, or even allow butterflies to lay their eggs and you get lots of caterpillars, that can devastate a crop really quickly. So therefore, particularly for brassicas such as your cabbages, your cauliflowers, your broccolis, your Swedes, everything seems to like those, and they really should be netted. So a key question you probably want to know is, at what point do I install the protection around my vegetables? Now I'm aware of a lot of growers that wait to see the signs of an attack and then install the netting or the protection. By that point, it could actually be too late. What I've started to do over the last couple of years, I've put the protection immediately at the point I plant my vegetables out, and get them protected right from that point onwards. So if you get an attack, for example, of white butterfly that start laying their eggs on top of your vegetables, they become caterpillars really quickly, and caterpillars are hungry insects. They can munch through your veg like nobody's business. So if you leave it till those eggs are laid, it could be too late. So my advice is that where you know that a vegetable needs protection, put that protection up at the point you put the plants into the ground, and don't wait. This is something called scaffold netting, the green netting. If you live in the United States, you might know it as debris netting. And this is a really fine netting that doesn't allow many things to get through. There is one problem with this type of netting, which I'm going to talk about in a minute. But when you do select a netting, you need to have a netting that can allow a good flow of air into your vegetables, plenty of light, and clearly can prevent the insects getting in. Now this type of netting, you can buy it in different sizes. I normally get it in these rolls here. This is about 1.5 meters in length, but when it opens out, it doubles. So actually it's 3 meters. And for the size of my vegetable beds, that's a really good length for me to be able to provide the protection over my vegetables. I can't remember the exact cost of this. I think I bought a 50-meter roll and it cost me around about 30 to 40 pounds. But remember what I said earlier in the video, that 30 to 40 pound goes over currently 5 years. So actually, when you work out the cost per year, it's pretty good value for money. Now, here's the problem with this type of netting. Remember, it's called scaffold or debris netting. So it's used on building sites, it's used on scaffolding, where they'll tie this netting to the scaffold. And the means of tying it, can you see the 2 black lines running along the netting? But notice there's some larger holes there. And that's where they tie it to the scaffolding. But that's a problem for protection of vegetables, because clearly it's easy for insects to get into those holes. So there's 2 main ways that you can deal with this. The first one is you could fold the netting and sew it. So if you've got a sewing machine and the will to do it, then you could sew it so it overlaps, so these holes won't be a problem. The other way is the way I do it. Now I've taken a second layer of netting off just to show you today. So what I will do is overlap this first layer of netting with another layer so that these black lines don't overlap, and then I've got them completely covered. This netting you can see here is from last year. It's about to come down. It covered my Swedes and it's just been battered about by a bit of wind, but I am going to be putting a much more sturdy frame up and showing you how I do that in a later video. Something to be aware of with this type of netting is it's not a mesh, so there are fine holes in it, and it's really important when you're erecting the frame and putting the netting up for the first time that none of the netting will be in contact with the vegetables. The reason for that is because butterflies can lay eggs on the netting and can find their way through onto the vegetables, and then clearly they become caterpillars, and as you can see, that can be a major problem. Caterpillars, if they get inside the netting, can devastate a crop quite quickly. So that's down to the erection of the frame. I am going to be doing a video in the near future showing you how to erect a budget frame and put the netting on correctly, which will be much more robust than what you're looking at here, so keep an eye out for that video. Now, in addition to that type of scaffold or debris netting for smaller insects, you may consider using fleeces and meshes, and there is a difference between the two. The fleece, which I have here, is again a very fine material with very little gaps in it, so there's very few insects will get through this. And although this will provide some protection from insects, its main purpose as a fleece is normally to provide a bit of insulation. So like in the colder months, if you've got vulnerable plants or seedlings, you can wrap them with the fleece and that will protect them from frosts and other types of colder temperatures. But they do provide an element of protection against insects, but that's not their primary purpose. The other option is something called a mesh, which is a similar type of looking material to what I've just shown you, but it is made of synthetic material and it really doesn't allow an awful lot of insects through. I've just ordered something called EnviroMesh, which is a more expensive product to use as an experiment to see how different it will be from the scaffold or debris netting that I've used. So in a future video I'll let you know how I get on with that. There are other growers that recommend things like EnviroMesh as the main cover for protection of vegetables, so I'm assuming that it's a good product, but I will give it a try and let you know. Now, there is a certain type of netting that you need that demands that you allow certain insects into the vegetables but not others. Now, bird netting is something that you might consider using to protect your, say, soft fruits or other vegetables from birds, but still allow enough space for insects to get in to pollinate where they need. So for example, if you were to cover strawberry plants with the scaffold netting that we looked at a little bit earlier, there'd be no room for the bees to get in to pollinate. So therefore you would get your strawberries flowering, but you wouldn't get any strawberries because they wouldn't pollinate. So with my strawberries and other soft fruit, I'll cover it in this bird netting, which has about 20mm squares gaps, which will prevent the birds getting to the strawberries but allow the bees to get in to pollinate. So if there are other vegetables that you need to protect that need to be pollinated, this type of netting might be ideal. So this roll of bird netting I bought last year, 50 metres in length, so it's going to last me an awful long time. It's about 1.2 metres in height, but then it opens and doubles to 2.4. It's also worth mentioning, I will do a later video on this, is when you're installing the netting, you've got to make sure the netting is secured down properly, because what you don't want is you don't want birds getting inside and getting trapped. Our job here is just to prevent the insects and wildlife from getting to our vegetables, but not to harm them. That's not what we want to do, so we need to be sympathetic when we are using these types of materials to make sure that we're installing them properly and being sympathetic to the wildlife as well. Now, although I don't really have a problem with this myself in this particular vegetable plot, I'm aware that people watching the video in other parts of the country all around the world have issues with other types of wildlife such as rabbits, deers and larger wildlife. So the netting and the mesh and the other suggestions that we've looked at previously, they won't be appropriate for those type of wildlife. So you might need to think about doing something a bit more substantial. One of those suggestions could be chicken wire, which as you can see is much more rigid but flexible metal barrier that you could erect around your vegetable plot to prevent those types of wildlife from getting to them. Now, chicken wire can be more costly than the netting based upon similar sizes, but it does last a long time. So as an investment, it's something that you'll find is cost effective over the life of your vegetable growing. So chicken wire is something that you might need to consider using if you have an issue with certain types of wildlife, as previously mentioned. So speaking to vegetable growers over the years and some of the questions I get on my YouTube channel, it's clear that there is often a misunderstanding of when to use netting, what is the right netting, and whether it should be used at all. So I'm hoping this video has given you some ideas about what type of protection you might need to provide to your vegetable plants and when. And if you have liked this video, don't forget to give it the thumbs up. And if you want to subscribe to the channel for future videos on how to sow and grow fruit and veg and 1 or 2 recipe ideas, don't forget to press the subscribe button. And I'll see you all on the next video.